Hey everyone, how are you doing? Today I want to show you the updated version of Face AI, version 3, which is from 5.2 onwards. Many things changed. I built it from the ground up to be like more performant, a little bit more cleverly coded and stuff like this. Everything is a lot more organized, so if you set up an AI, it's a lot easier and a lot more straightforward, okay? But without further ado, maybe I just give you a little high-level overview, and then we go in and build our own AI, okay? What do you think? Okay, so there's a lot of ground to cover, so I try to make it as fast as possible, but be prepared, it's probably a bit of a longer tutorial. Okay, so, but without further ado, let's just get into it. Once you go to the marketplace and add it to your project, it will look like this. This is just a standard third-person template from Epic. You will see a folder called Face AI. Open that. You will see 4 folders. One for demo assets. You can delete it later on if you don't need it anymore. We have the core blueprints, decisions, which is like behavior trees and stuff like that. And then we have utility, where we can kind of like help to let the AI do something, or direct the AI, or cast spells and projectiles and notifies and stuff like that. You know, we get to that later on. But before we do anything else, before I show you something, I just want to show you real quick how you set up your project to work with Face AI. It's very straightforward, that's why we do it now. Okay, so first we go to project settings and we go to gameplay tags, and I already added it here, but basically you add an array to the game tag table list and you add the gameplays tag list, which is here. And these will later on be used basically to make the AI switch from one locomotion animation blueprint to another. Okay, we go to that later on as well. Then we go to your player character, which is here. In this case, it's a third-person character. And all you need to do is, first of all, you go here, you say AI setup, and you see here, play AI setup here, and then you say self. All right. If you go in here, you can see we have a function library AI, where we have like some useful things you can use for your AI if you want to code something. But also there's a player setup, which is this one, which is just a little bit easier to just add this and then it's done. The next thing we want to do is we go to the class defaults. We search for tags and we add a player tag. This is doesn't have to be player tag, but you know, in general, this is used for basically communicating with the AI. So the AI will always look for tags, and in this case, it's a player, so they know it's a player and they interact accordingly, however you set it up. And after you did these three things, everything is up and running, and your AI can now detect the player character, and you don't need to do anything anymore to set up for the Face AI. Okay, so now let's go in and look a little bit closer at the Face AI base character class. Alright, so, okay, if we have opened this up, what you need to understand is basically, if you haven't used my asset before, this is a base AI, and whenever you want to do a new AI, you'd simply say create child blueprint class, okay? But if you want to do any changes, you only need to do them here in this Face AI base, okay? And yeah, here's a lot of things. Everything is properly put into graphs. You know, everything is separate, like damage, you know, all kinds of stuff, spell casting, orders, and stuff like this. You will find everything is a lot more organized than it was in the previous version, which was a big focus for me to do here. You also see that if you go to the class defaults, what you will find is here is a tab called setup, and everything you need, except for later on the face component, but everything you need to set up here is basically under this setup tab, right? So we have randomization, customizations. Let's get through this real quick, okay? So we have direction change slow, which is basically when the AI wants to turn. It slows down the AI a little bit. You can turn that on and off. Friendly fire, obviously, if you want the AI to be able to damage friends of the same faction. A health bar, so for example, if you want to show always health bar, or maybe you only want to show it at bosses, you can just click it on. Then we have stats, where you can change the faction, the class. These are useful later on for like, for example, we have something called squads, where you can kind of like say, okay, in the squads, only 1 or 2 person will attack the player at the same time, even if the squad is maybe 10 people, right? So it will kind of like organize how the group will attack you. Then we have a camp name, which we use for activities and patrol paths, so you can search them randomly and assign them randomly without always having to click it. That is very useful when you spawn AIs in, and they will automatically find something that belongs to their camp, basically. And then we have health, max health, damage, can it block, and then block chance. 1 is 100%, and 0.2 is, for example, 20%. And then we have a damage type. Same goes for ranged, so you can add a projectile class. You can also add several. So you can say, for example, I don't know, this is a normal bullet, and then every once in a while there's a special bullet fired by the AI. Then we have the same for the throwable classes, which is like explosive, grenades, whatever, you know, a rock, right? And then we have here, where does it attach? Because it first spawns and then it flies from there. And then projectile spread, of course, how accurate is it? Then we have parkour, climb. This is, you just add some animations there. We have voice. So basically we have a voice notify you can add to animations. For example, if the AI gets damaged and it plays a damage animation, you can add a notify, I'll show you that later, where you specify, okay, this now play a damaged sound, and then you add here a damaged sound. So you can have the same notification and the same animation for many different AIs, and they will always play a different sound because they are referenced not in the animation or in the montage, but in the blueprint itself. Okay. Then with customizations, so here we have like hit effect, sound effect. Obviously, you know, if you get hit, plays blood effect maybe, or if you block, a spark effect, an effect on spawn. So if they spawn, do you want to have an effect there or not? And random skeletal mesh is basically, of course you can add just here on the mesh whatever mesh you want for the AI, but if you want to have, like, for example, like bandits, you know, you don't always want to have them look the same. You can add that here, and then they have several different skins basically, and they will randomly chosen. If you have nothing in here, it will automatically just choose whatever you set up there. But the moment you set up some here, they will randomly choose between these. And then randomization, you find that here. This is kind of like an example, right? So what happens here is basically you go in here and you can see how it's set up. But basically what happens now is you get the movement speed and you say plus minus 50. Right, and then you set it a new movement speed on spawn, which basically makes it so that when you have this same class chasing the player, they don't run at the same movement speed. They all have like slightly varied movement speed, which makes it a little bit more organic, right? So it makes it a little bit more alive and not too uniform, right? This is it for the standard setup inside the player. But now let's take a look at how you set up basically the decisions and the factions and stuff like this that the player, that the AI attacks or not attacks or engages with. Okay, let's take a look here. What's important to know is that basically here what you set up is basically just like who is the AI, right? And what you set up in the face AI component is basically how the AI reacts, right? For example, here base pose is just like that's the first animation state the AI will be in, right? Not so important. General settings. Let's go through this one by one. Later on, it will be a lot of repetitive because all the phases or states, you know, They're all set up pretty much the same, so I have to explain one and you kind of get the gist for all the other ones. But let's start with general settings. Starting phase, very self-explanatory. Normally it starts probably in idle because it's the most common one when the player is not yet detected and they just walk around. But you can add that to whatever. Then is alive should be on, of course. Replicated. If you have a single player game, you can turn this off and it saves a little bit of performance, but not too big. But it's always good, you know, to have a little bit of a possibility to optimize. Then behavior tree is kind of like all these phases, they lead to a behavior tree where basically the decisions are executed. And you can make several different behavior trees. That means even if everything is exactly the same, but the behavior tree has different executions inside. Let's open this real quick. Here, you can change these things and they will behave basically differently, you know, but that's a separate tutorial at another time. But you can change that. Then death animations. If they die, they play an animation, and after the animation is played, they go to ragdoll. But if you have no death animation, they go immediately into ragdoll. Okay. Max flight height is simply how high can the AI fly if it is a flying AI, right? Transition animation is between phases if you want to have like there is certain animation. And tag list and message class is basically my take on automating a little bit of the setup. We come to that later, but it's very, very useful and very powerful to quickly create different factions and different AIs and how they behave and stuff like this. We come to that. It's very important. It's one of the biggest new features that you can also expand upon once you understand it and make your own. But very, very big new update. Then we go to idle settings, which is basically, like I said, the general starting phase, and it's also the most complex because you can change it how it behaves. Okay. Before we go into settings, let's talk about this. So every phase, even if I open like follow, you see you will always have this follow settings, flee settings, and the settings tab is always the same because this is going to be used and recycled basically for every phase, and you can set it up individually for every phase, and this is basically the main setup how the AI behaves. And then each phase will have extra values and extra variables that you can change, right, depending on what kind of phase it is, right? But they are basically extras. For example, idle, we can say standing or location, then they go to a location, and after 5 seconds or so they go to another location. You can say here how long do they stand in between locations, for example 5 seconds. And random location distance is basically if you have this, a random location within 600 units will be chosen and then they go there. Same for token. And random activities is basically just, you know, if you have this, will he choose random activities. And return to start location is simply if the AI follows and wants to attack the player but then gives up, does it go back to the starting location or does it just stand wherever it stops? Okay. Yes. Now let's go into settings. Like I said, these are always the same. You see here the phase idle. Don't change this. This is actually already set up for everything and it should stay the same. Then we have base and overlay pose. We come to that later, but basically you can choose now, okay, which one of these is the animation blueprint that is used in this phase. So that way you can have like a normal, basically a normal walk when they're in idle, but when they go to attack the player, they change into maybe like a sword animation locomotion, right? Blueprint. Then we have movement speed, self-explanatory. Alert sign is basically when they change to this phase, they can have a sign above their head where they show it, right? I show that later on. But basically, if you know, for example, Metal Gear Solid, when they when they see the player, or when they suspect there's someone, they have like a question mark above the face, or like a exclamation mark and stuff like that. Then we have targets. Basically here you can see player, but we can also say, for example, samurai, you know, and when they see other AIs or a player with this tag, they will act accordingly to whatever you say later on. For example, messages. No, within range. Let's start with this because we had tags. Within range, what you can do is you say, okay, if you see the player here within 1,000 units, this is Unreal units, this is like 10 meters, you go to melee phase and attack the player, and you can also say just line of sight, okay? I personally like to use within range because you can say here, you can say the distance, right? We have the same thing here on site, which is basically just say, okay, how far can the AI look? We have that later on where we can type that in, how far the AI can look, but basically once it sees it, it does whatever, right? Once it sees a player, it attacks. Then we have the same here, health, you know, if you have, I don't know, below 80% health, you run away, right? For example, civilians, when they see, and it's once, right? And then delay, if you enter the phase, you shouldn't use that on idle, but on other phases. If you enter the phase and after 10 seconds, plus minus, you go to another phase. And this only happens if he cannot execute whatever the phase does. For example, when he wants to attack and he cannot do that in 10 seconds, he maybe goes to defend, okay? And then we have something more, it's called messages. And messages are basically a direct link to the AI, where you can say, okay, if the AI, for example, gets damage, it goes to the hit state, right? So he gets damage in the idle phase, and then he plays a hit animation, right? And you can set these messages up in every single phase individually. So this is very powerful. For example, also we have a notify that triggers, for example, a dodge notify when the player attacks, for example, and the notify sends out an area message of dodge. And if this AI receives this message dodge, it will go to the dodge stage and tries to dodge the attack of the player. This is kind of like how this works, okay? And you can also use it for a threat, for example. So when another AI sees the player, it maybe shouts, and this shout sends out a threat message, an area message. And then if this hear the message, they will investigate wherever they hear this sound from, you know? This is how it works. We see that later on in more detail when we set up our AI ourselves. But this is basically every phase is going to be set up like this, where you set up like messages, what happens when you directly talk to the AI, or here you can set up what they do when they see something, okay? And as you can see here, we kind of like have three categories, four. We have the idle phase, which is like separate because very important. We have civil, which is like follow, seek, flee, and parkour. We have alert, which is like going on patrols or investigate or guard something. And then we have combat. So here you find all the phases that are important for the combat, right? When they actually fight with each other or with a player. And all of these settings are always the same. And then sometimes they have like different variables, but most of them will have one variable that's very important, and that is a transition, the dodge transition in this case. And what you can do is basically set here a phase, like for example melee or defend. And what happens is now when the state of defend done everything here, for example, let's go here, so you understand, here. So basically when it enters a dodge stage, right, it plays an animation and then it switches phases, right? And this switches phases is basically whatever you set here in the transition. That means after the dodge is done, so the phase has been completed, it will go to either the melee state or the defense state, right? And you can add here as many as you want, and it will randomly choose one of these, okay? So you have to set that up for every single one. Also, like for melee, for example, after one attack is done, you can say, okay, afterwards you go, either you attack again, or you go to defend yourself, or you go to, you know, dodge out maybe, or something like this. Right, so this is very important. And yeah, this is basically it. And also you have here the general, it's under the combat tag. And what we have here is target consideration radius, which is basically how far can the AI look. In normal is 3,500, so 35 meters. I think that's a nice kind of like nice distance for the AI to look. You can say needed line of sight, change target when hit. So when another AI that is not the main target hits the AI, will it change to that other target, which basically kind of like takes revenge. Oh, you attack me, right? And you can disengage by distance and disengage by lose sight, you know. And then if you disengage, right here you can say after 5 seconds of losing sight, you go to investigate, and then they take the last position and they go there and they try to investigate and find the player. But yeah, it looks maybe a bit confusing if you've never set that up before, but it will all make sense later on when we set up the AI itself. But this is just like a little overview, okay? So after this, let's take a little bit look at the other utility blueprints and stuff like this before we go and start setting up our first AI. Alright, let's kind of like go through the utility blueprints very, very fast. We're gonna come back to them either way at some point in time, but let's kind of take a little look. We have, oh yeah, you see that under utility. Let's go with AI control. What we have here is we have activities, which is kind of like from the idle state, right? Then we have ladders where they can climb up. We have group leader, where you can kind of like assign squads to several AIs to kind of like how to say, dictate a little bit how they kind of act and fight against a single enemy. We have a path corner, which is for patrols. Speaking of patrols, here we have one, but basically you can assign special events during the patrol. And with a spawner, which is like just spawn sometimes when you spawn an AI, just to kind of like keep track of where they are and stuff like that. Then we have data, which is like all the structs and faction and reactions. This comes later when, like I said, we have like a little bit of an automation going on sometimes. We come back to that later. Dedicated spawner is basically an upgraded spawner that's also multiplayer ready. We can do like waves and stuff like this. We have a separate section for that as well. Health bar is basically just a very simple health bar that we spawn for the AI, so you can always go in here and kind of like change it up to your liking, right? This is the health bar that's spawned when you click the little icon there. Interfaces, we have 4 interfaces, but the most important is the AI core interface, where you can basically have several things that you can like get from the AI, and you can just like get all the information you need from there, and kind of like if you need it in some code or in some blueprints and stuff like that. Then we have notifies, which is very important because here we have like dodge notifies, melee attack, ranged attack, spells, voices, and weapon notify, which is not used in the moment, but it will be later on. And yeah, we will see all of these in action later on when we go to the examples, but they are basically used to drive certain events during animations. Okay. Then we have projectiles, just some example ones, like a bullet and an explosive, like a grenade. Signs is, like I said, we have like this Metal Gear kind of style where they have like a question mark or like exclamation mark and stuff like that over their head in certain phases when they go into, when they detect the player and stuff like this. Again, you know, this simple animation here, bup, you can always go in and change this up to your liking, or change the icons and stuff like that. And then we have, of course, spell blueprints, right? They're already set up in a way that they kind of like work. They should also work multiplayer. For the most part, this is like not 100% multiplayer replicated, but it's very simple setup that can be easily be replicated, and I think it's very nice setup to give the AI all kinds of abilities to use without going back into the into here and like change too many things up. So it's a very simple system, but very powerful one. Yeah, this is for the utility, and some of these you will see very soon, because now we go into the examples. And I'm gonna take a look, hands-on look, how it actually looks when they move. Now, before we start actually setting up our AI from start to finish, let's take a look at the little examples that I did here. Okay, so let's go in here. As you can see here, if we just start here, they should be just running around. Yeah, so they will just run around, stop, stand a few seconds, and then search another spot to go. You know, just like a little bit of like a movement for like civilians and pedestrians. Then we have here patrols, right? They will just follow this line, and you can actually choose if they should just follow it once, or maybe they go back and forth, or they go one way and then take the shortest route back to the beginning, stuff like that. Very straightforward. And then we have activities, which are a bit more complex, but as you can see here, they will go to a spot, perform a certain animation. Once that is done, after a few seconds, you can specify that. I'll show you that in a second. After that is done, they will go to another one and do the same thing again. And let's take a look at activities. So if we click here, as you can see here, there are a few things we can do. First of all, we can say here a limit how many AIs can go into that activity. In this case it's 1, but if you have 2, as you can see here, there's a slot. Oh wait, nope. I don't know why, but when I record videos, my cursor actually vanishes inside the viewport, which is a little bit annoying, but either way. So, but yeah, here you have animations that play, and preferably, of course, these would be kind of like a looping animation. You can do everything looping by actually doing here. So this is how it looks normally. So the animation plays once, but if you press this here and say default, it actually loops the animation. And this kind of animation you would kind of like plug in here, slot transform, so you can kind of like put it somewhere else. And then here we have the camp name, and I think I said that already in when we talked about the stats of the AI. This is Alpha 1, and if you go now to civilian here, as you can see here under setup and stats, you find also camp name, which is also Alpha 1, and that's basically means he will, when he searches for activities, he will search for activities with this tag. And because this other activity here had this tag, Alpha 1, they kind of like are connected, and when he searches for a random activity, he will go to this one or to one of the other 3, because all of these have the same tag, basically, right? And that's how you can basically make people go around and have them do stuff like building something or searching something or talking to a vendor and stuff like that, you know. It's kind of like very versatile what we can do with that. Next thing, let's take a look at combat. Okay. Combat is very straightforward. All of these are set up the same. They will attack once and then go to defense, and then attack once, go to defense, and they're just different attacks basically. This one is just melee, so he will go defense. That means he walks around, and the animation looks a bit weird because it's a very simple, just 1D. What's it called? locomotion, right? So of course you want to have like strafe walking and stuff like this in your animation blueprint, but as you can see, it works. He comes to a certain range. As I told you, you can set it up per animation. We have here ranged. I think it already stopped, and we have here the spell casting. As you can see here, there's a little notification on the ground that spawns first, and then the spell itself with the debug sphere is spawned afterwards, right? And all of that we're gonna set up later on when we set up our own AI. Let's take a look at the ranged attack. As you can see here, we're attacking ranged. We go to defense mode where you just walk around a little bit, and now we go back and we attack, right? So very, very simple stuff. And now we go here to squats, and squats are basically, how do you say, it's a way to kind of like coordinate. You have here the group leader, right? And it will automatically search for class and squat. So each one of these has maybe, if you use class, otherwise you will use just a squad faction in a distance of 1000 units around him. And basically what it does, it includes it, right? And now only one person will attack at a time. Everyone else is kind of like just moving around in the defense state, and one of them sometimes will throw a grenade, right? So that way, even if you fight maybe against 10 or 20 people, you know, only a certain amount of people will actually come and attack you, which makes everything a little bit more organized, a little bit more manageable, right? And as you can see here in the group leader, you can assign them actively, or you can kind of like search for them. If there's nothing included in here, it will automatically search for these ones. And then we have group phase. Here you can say, okay, the limited phase is the one that's only happening once or twice, however you say. So if you put this to 2, only 2 people will attack at once, and waiting phase is defense, right? And then here we have group montage, which is basically the throw of the grenade in this case, but you can also do, for example, a spell casting, right? If you have like a mage in the background, he can kind of like do like a spell every once in a while, right? Here's a cooldown 5, is very low. Maybe they make like 15, it's a bit more manageable, okay? Yes, so much for the examples, and now I would say let's go and set up our own little AI. For now, let's just, you know, we don't need that here. We just clean everything up so we can play around with our actors. Actually, let's do it in the group one. Here, we need that. Yes. So, now let's set something up from the beginning, okay? The first thing you want to do is, what I like to do is you make here and you make factions, okay? So because we gonna show you now, or I'm gonna show you now, as I told you before, we have this quality of life thing where they set up things, you know, automatically a little bit, and that is use tag list and message class, and I'm gonna show you that now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go here and we create a child blueprint class. That's very important. You always want to create a child blueprint class, so that this is always the parent. We go in here and we call this a BP, let's say knight base. Okay. So for every knight you want to create, later on you will create a child blueprint class from this one. Okay. Move here. It's just important that this one is at the base of everything. And we're gonna go here, create a folder called knights, and we drop this in here, move here. And while we're at it, what we can also do is actually duplicate this. In this case, it already is a parent of the other one, right? And we call this BP Samurai base. And we actually go here, because it's our second faction, so to speak. I'm gonna show you now how to create AIs, but also how to create factions. Okay, so drop this in here. And let's start with the knight. We open this up. And what we want to do is very easy. First we want to make sure that this one is always a knight. So we're gonna go search for tags, and we add a tag here called knight, right? This is now a tag, and because of the tag, this is a knight. Okay. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to stats, and we check here faction is knight, yes. And it's a swordsman, that's okay. We can change that later on as well. Health, everything is fine. What we want to do then is we go here to face AI. And how do we do this? Let me see. How do we start? Okay, we do it like this. First, I want to show you how it's done manually, and then I'm gonna show you how to use the tag list and the message class. Okay, so we set this one up just as a base. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we go to targets, and we want to have in the targets, let's go here, targets, we search this, and as you can see here, every single phase has this target thing, because you can have actually targets differ from phase to phase, but in general you want them all to be the same. So what you do is samurai, because this is gonna be our enemy faction, and what you're gonna do is you copy this, and now with shift left click, on targets, you can actually copy this in. And you want to copy that into every single phase. So in every single phase, these are our enemies. Okay? So our enemies here, here, here. Bam, bam. Okay? So this is the first thing. This is important because now we have specified our targets. It's for once the player, and otherwise it's the samurai. Next, we're gonna say this AI starts always in the idle phase, right? So we go to general settings, idles, perfect, all done. Next thing we want to do is we go to idle settings, and now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, if this AI sees a samurai, it's gonna go attack. So how we're gonna do that is within range, right? And now we say here samurai, and let's say if a samurai is within 1000 units, we're gonna go attack, right? You can also say first you go to taunt and you play a taunt animation, and after the taunt, actually let's do this. We don't have a taunt animation, but we just use whatever animation, okay? And we say a line of sight, so only if it's basically in front of the AI and within range, we're gonna do that. Normally you want to do the same thing. We can just copy this in here, and you, instead of samurai, we say player. So this has to be done for every single tag that is also a target, right? But you can do, for example, now use it to your advantage and say maybe if he sees a player that is 1500 units away, so basically that means samurais will be attacked last or later, and if it sees a player, he has a bigger range to see the player and to attack the player, right? So you can kind of like prioritize a little bit in a way who he sees first. Okay, so this is good. Next thing we want to do is we want to say messages, and messages are important because, as I told you before, they're basically direct line to the AI and change the phase, right? So what we want to do now, if the AI gets damage, oh, by the way, I didn't say that before. If the AI gets damage, they automatically get a message that is a damage message, right? And the same goes for blocking. If they get hit and they block, they automatically get a block message. It's built into the code already, so you can always do this, and they will perfectly, you know, always get. You don't have to call this message somewhere else. If you damage them, that's automatically. And then we say maybe something like, I don't know, we can say lure, and then you get investigated, right? So this is kind of like a nice little setup that's always, most of the time, this is a very good setup. We can copy this because we're gonna need it later. And now let's see, okay, this is what we have, and this is basically all you need to do. You can of course go crazy here and say on-site, blah, blah, blah. You do a lot of stuff. But we keep it simple. We just say within range. And now imagine, okay, it sees an AI. So the next thing is he goes to taunt, right? So that's what I like to do, by the way. I like to go from, I go after it through the motions, right? So if he sees this, he goes there. So I set up next taunt. So I set them up one after another, how they would kind of like be called, right? So taunt, the way taunt is set up at the moment in the ability, in the behavior blueprint, is it simply plays an animation. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say animation here. Oh, this is attack, it jumped up. So everything is open now. Let's go all the way down here. So we have an animation, and as I said, range and damage is totally unimportant at the moment because it simply looks for the animation in taunt. And we just say, I don't know, do the melee animation, right? It doesn't matter. We don't have a taunt animation, so we just do this. And after the taunt animation, we say, okay, you do one of two things. You can either go attack and melee immediately after, or you go to defend. So he sees the player or the samurai, and then he makes a taunt animation, right? And then he decides, okay, I attack or I defend, right? That's everything we actually need to do. What you can also do is you change here already the animation blueprint that you want to use, for example, swords if it's a swordman, right? So now we know what happens is he goes to either defend, so we go to the defense settings. Here you also set everything up like mostly like the messages. We can paste it. You remember we copied this, but we don't need lure because he's already in fighting, right? So but he can dodge, so we set dodge and dodge. So if he gets a dodge message, he goes to the dodge phase. So dodge, block and hit are mostly only be accessed or like kind of like switched to with these messages. Normally you don't really do any transitions to one of these, right? So that's also important to know. And here we don't maybe change the movement speed to 320. You don't have to do much more, except now you set a delay maybe for 6 seconds plus minus 2, and then you go and attack. So he's 6 plus minus 2 seconds in the defense phase, and then he goes to the attack. So next he goes attacking, right? What we're gonna do is we go to attack, melee, same thing. Maybe here the animation speed is a bit different. Maybe, oh, what we can also do in the taunt, taunt, we also set up an alert sign. Alert sign maybe here, let's go danger, right? So whenever they go in taunt, they do that. Either way, we were at attack, okay? So attack, what we want to do is we want to make an animation. Here in melee, we say if you are within 200 range of your target, and this is normal damage, so we leave it at 0 and whatever the damage is here. What we can do then is we make another one. In our case we just use the same, also 200, maybe like even 150. It's just a punch, so they have to be close, and we want to change the damage for this one to 60. So there's one normal punch that's not so strong, and one punch you can do that's very strong. Okay. And then here again, paste the message in, change this to dodge, and dodge. And of course what you can do is you can say, okay, in the attack phase, I delete this one, the damage and hit, and that means if he gets damage in this phase, he still gets damage, but he doesn't change the phase to hit phase. So normally if you get if you hit the AI, it will kind of like stop the phase it's momentarily in and just change to the hit phase, so you can basically stun log enemies and stuff like that. Right, you can always decide that you don't want to do these, and that makes the AI like ignore damage in some cases and stuff like that, you know. It's kind of like a nice little thing to know that you have these abilities. Now, as you can see here, attack melee distance, it is there because it's the old one that we used. I just wanted to leave it in just in case you want to use it for something else. And yeah, now what we do is we're going to say transition, go back to defend, right? So now what we have is a normal loop. So they go into, they see the enemy from here, they taunt them in the taunt phase, and then they go to defend here, execute this, and then they go to melee. And as you can see, we didn't really take a long time to set this up. Now what we would set up is basically hit, you know, that we have a hit animation. We don't have one, you know, but you would put in here an animation. Let's just put in here, I don't know, I don't have anything. It's confusing if we also just put the punch in here. But yeah, you would put it hit. You can also do stun animations, you know, block animations. You know, you want to fill that with animations. The animations is really what brings this whole system to life, right? And also dodge. You want to have dodge animations and all these things. We don't have that, so we leave it. And we go here. Perfect. So now that we have this, as you can see, all of that took a little bit of time, right? So that's okay if you do it once, but if you do it over and over again, it takes a little bit of time. So let's set up the same thing here, but let's make it a little bit faster, okay? First of all, we go to stats and make it samurai. Also, we search tags, add here samurai, right? This is still what we need to do. Everything else fits, I think. But now what we're gonna do is we're gonna say use general settings, use tag list, and say message class is normal. Okay, you're gonna see that in a second, because now we go somewhere where it looks very familiar, and that is utility data. Let's start with faction DT. And as you can see here, we have here all our factions that we could previously decide on here, right? Knight, samurai. And what it does basically, as you can see here, we have face tags, and we have here a lot of things. And if you open this up, as you can see here, face idle, face guard, face follow, face block, blah blah blah, ranged. You have basically all the phases you have here, and you can add the tags, right? So as you can see here, we only had like player and samurai, but here I actually added player, samurai, Viking, bandits, and you can always add them later on, because when the AI is spawned, all of this will automatically be added to the AI, right? So you don't, when you set this up, you can actually totally ignore the targeting thing, and you can also retroactively add factions. So if I add here, for example, now I don't know, Indian, right? So this tag, once I press start, will automatically be added in the idle phase, in this case, of the night, right? So you can later on always add these tags, and you don't need to go into every single AI, because that can happen, that you have to really go into every single AI and make changes, and this is just something to make it a bit faster, because now you don't have to change the tags inside any of the blueprints, but you can just do it here in the data table, and it will automatically be added. And the same thing we have also for reactions. And reactions is basically the messages, right? And as you can see here, we have, nothing is set up here, but we have here normal, and we have here the same thing. We have here our phases, and as you can see here, you can add it. You don't have to do that for every single phase if you don't use the phase. And you always, it's very simple, you say, okay, this is for idle phase, and here are the messages I'm gonna add, right? Threads, and this is what this taglet, this message class is doing, right? So here, for example, no block would be the same as normal, but there will be no message for block. Right, where's it? For example, melee here. So we go in here. As you can see, here is block, and no block class would basically, for example, be that there's no block message and they, you know, don't change into the block phase because maybe the enemy cannot block and stuff like that, right? These two things, which basically means now that I use the tag list and the message class, all I need to do is I have to go in and make the setup like, okay, within range, when you see, I don't know, the night, you go to melee attack, right? And then I go to combat, attack, melee, and I say here, after melee is done, he goes to defend, and here message attack, no, not attack, we don't need to do the messages, and we don't need to do the tags, which is very nice. We go here, animations, you say melee, 150, and then we go to defend, make it less fast, say delay, 5 seconds this time, plus minus 1, and then you go melee. And as you can see, it's a lot faster, right? So it's because the annoying part is really the messages and the targets, to keep that really like up to date and everything works. And with this, you take out the equation of that. You don't need to worry about that. You only need to basically design what happens. Here, of course, we want to see it in a certain range, line of sight, like this. Also maybe make it less fast, standing. So like this, and yeah, this looks good. And now in theory, if everything works, we just need to drag them in, and they should work. So let's see, we have them here. See, or oh yeah, he's already turned the right way. Then here we turn him around. And as you can see here, now they should fight. Yeah, as you can see here, now they're fighting. I didn't change the movement speed properly, I think. That's why they're a bit fast. But as you can see, they're fighting. And like I said, all AI systems live from the animation. So if you have good animation, it looks automatically a lot better. These are just like the vanilla animations. But as you can see, everything works. They're fighting, they go on distance and stuff like this. And as you can see also, like, we took a lot more time for the knight to set up, but for the samurai it was really bop, 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 and it was done, right? And this is how it works, right? Yeah, this is basically how you set up an AI and how you say what they should do. And it's the same thing. You can also go, for example, if the knight should run away when he gets damage, you can do like this. You don't say within range, right? But what you say is when he gets damage, he doesn't go to hit, but he goes to flee, right? And then we go to civil and flee, and here he runs 100 meter, 10 meters away, and then he goes back to idle. So now what should happen is he gets attacked. Let's see. Oh, I think because the bounding box there basically makes the damage. So what we want to do is we want to push it out a little bit here so that the range is actually there. That doesn't want to work. Let's see why this doesn't want to work. Idle. Go here. Damage goes to flee. That should work. Flee, we go here. And then we transition back to idle. Should work. I don't know why not. Oh, okay. I think I know. We go now to the example assets, to the animations. Yes. So as you can see, he hits him, but he doesn't do damage, and because he doesn't do damage, the knight will not run away. And that is because we don't have set up the animations yet. So as you can see here, we have the animation, but there's no notify. But what you want to do is want to go here. Let's actually open all three. We have, right, let's close it. We have three animations: melee, ranged, and spell cast. So as you can see, the spell cast is already done. We have here at the beginning the indicator for 1 second. We have here different time zones for 1 second, and then after 1 second we have add location that uses the indicator. So wherever the indicator was spawned, if not, it will use basically the target at the moment where the spell is casted. Okay, we'll come to that in a second. We have ranged attack where we shoot. Right, here's shoot, spawn throwable comes later. But basically at this point in the animation, the projectile will spawn, and in melee, we have nothing. That means what we need to do is we go here, add notify, called melee attack notify. This is all you need. We have this, and now if we play it, this AI should get damage, and then it should run away. Yeah, as you can see here, it got damaged, got scared, now it runs away. 10 meters, and then it goes back to idle. Now it goes back and attacks. Perfect, right? So this is basically how you can control your AIs, right? So, it's good. And now let's take a look at spellcasting, because this is kind of a bit more complicated. These are pretty straightforward. Actually, before that, we go here, throw. As you can see, it's also the range notify, but here it's spawn throwable and throw. So basically how it works is, at some point in time, the throwable will be spawned in the hand, for example, right? And then at this point here where you have the notified type throw, the grenade, for example, that is spawned will be thrown at the target. If you just use shoot, at this point in time, a projectile will be spawned in the direction of the target. Pretty straightforward. Spells are a little bit more complicated, but also totally manageable. Basically, there are two types. First is the indicator. If you want to use an indicator, you don't have to use an indicator, just so you know. Indicator here, and then you can say, okay, how long is the indicator? We have here 1, 2, 3.5, 3, 4 seconds. You can make it. You can copy one of these and make a new one. But basically, for us, it's 1 second. And then we say, okay, this is not important for this one, but this is important. Indicator itself. So if I do this, the indicator would basically spawn around the caster. If I don't do that, it will spawn at the target location. Okay, you can change the radius here. So if it's a big one, you can change it to 500 or whatever. You can say attach to AI. This is only if you do it at self. So basically you can spawn it around the caster and then make him follow it. And here you can also say spawn on floor. It's just a little check so that basically it will try to spawn the indicator at the floor or the spell as well, right? Attached to AI basically also can be used for other things. So we have this, and then we have the actual spawn of the spell, and that is like we have here several things. We have at location, which is at the target. We have around caster, which is like, you know, around the caster, right on top of the caster. We have a buff, and we have a fly at location, fly to location. All pretty. This is kind of like useless because we have the ranged shooting, but it's just there, and you can always go into the code and change things up. But basically, if you spawn at location, what you can say is, like I said before, indicator used, which means it will spawn at the location wherever the indicator was spawned, which means if the target moved, the spell will miss. If you untick this, it will always spawn at the target location. But we come to the, let's go to the spells actually. If we go in here, as you will see, we have also damage delay, which you can basically use maybe some spell Niagara effect. They have like a 1 or 2 seconds like build up animation before they actually explode. So you can say here 2, then it will start, and after 2 seconds it will do the damage. So the player still has time to dodge the spell, right? And here it's also very straightforward. You can say here what's the damage class, the fall off, because it's radial damage. You can have start and impact sounds, emitter template, Niagara or Cascade. We have a debug, we have a radius, and change spell radius if you want to change it. Right, so pretty straightforward. We have here some other ones like I don't know, overlap and stuff like that, you know. Take a look at it. But yeah, this is basically how you set up like an AI and how to do factions and stuff like this. And the good thing with the faction, the good thing with the factions is also now that we, I worked on my main project, which is not good. Either way, I will reverse it. The good thing is with the factions, what you can do now, you have this set up, you can just create a child blueprint class and make here all the changes, but it will still retain all the base of this. Okay, so take a look at it, and I hope you have fun. Alright, so let's take a look at the animation blueprint, right? This is very simple, but just let me explain it, because normally we would use AGR Pro for this, but the new update for the plugin is not yet ready, so we kind of like rebuild it a little bit, like, you know, this very simple version of it in the animation blueprints. Let's take a look. You find these in 01 demo assets, animations, UF4. I also set it up here in UF5 if you want to use that one. But basically you just go in here, and then let's first go to event graph, and this here you can basically just copy and paste if you do a new animation core blueprint, or you can, you know, use this one and like just adjust it. What this does is basically just get the character and the face component, and then the base pose and the overlay pose. And then in the update animation, which is basically a tag, it's gonna always check, okay, what is the current base pose and overlay pose. These are variables in here, and there will be set to different tags depending on what face you are. As you can maybe remember, or if you check the settings for each face, you can set up a base pose and overlay pose. And then here just some other things that might be important, you know, that you can use. And then if you go to the animation graph, you can also copy this and put it in. Yeah, here you have base pose and overlay pose, and as you can see here, basically if you want to add a new if you go in here, the idle one, as you can see here, we have a linked animation graphs, right? So that way you have one core animation graph, and in here you can link several different animation graphs, and the AI will basically switch between them. So if you want a new one, you can just copy this, rename this to maybe sword. So if they, you know, grab the sword, then you go in here and here, which is basically just, okay, as you can see here, we just copy this real quick. You say, okay, if you go in here, if the AI has a tag of, like, let's say sword, right, the sword animation thing, it goes into this link graph. Of course you have to change it here, but we don't have that at the moment, so just leave it. And then if it is not, so you copy this, make it also sword, and then you say simply not boolean, this one, plug it in, and that's it. That's everything you need to do to basically add in a new animation graph, right? And the same is going to happen for overlay poses, which is basically overlay pose. You can, yeah, think of it exactly like an overlay pose. So the animation should be always driven by the base pose, and the overlay pose is basically something that can add maybe when they're injured, or when they have like a, I don't know, very specific stance or something like this, but the footwork is the same, because overlay pose is only the upper body. Yes, so here you link this, and you can also go into this blueprint that is linked. You find that here, and this is also a very simple one. As you can see here, we have like an idle safe pose, then we have here standing, which is basically idle, and here if you're walking, so you're not idle, you basically just go in here, and from here on out you just have a simple blend space. Of course, if you have in this I only have like a 1D animation, but of course for the best looking animation you want to have strafe 4-way or 8-way movement, and all this is basically just a standard animation graph, right? So that's basically it, how you set it up. And yeah, this one will be replaced once the AGR Pro plugin is ready to go, and so this is an intermediate solution, but the way it is set up can always be kind of like, you know, easily integrated once the plugin drops, so you don't have to rebuild a ton of stuff. And I also will make an integration video once it comes to that point. So enjoy.